You know, every believer eventually faces disappointment. Reality does not always meet our expectations. A lot of us are familiar with this story in John chapter 11, verse 1, the death of Lazarus. We know the ending. Lazarus, spoiler alert, comes back from the dead and is raised back to life. But look at what leads up to this point in the story. Look at how it starts off. It says, now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. You're supposed to be familiar with Mary and Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair. And this will happen later in John's gospel. And whose brother Lazarus was ill. So you're supposed to know, okay, we have someone named Lazarus who's very sick. He's actually at the point of death, and his sisters aren't just a couple random women off the street. These are two women, and this is a brother, this is a family that Jesus deeply loves. He deeply loves them. They have a good friendship and a good relationship. So these aren't just some random strangers off the street going, we got a sick brother. This is someone who Jesus dearly loves. So the sisters sent to him, right? Knowing that they have history and experience with Jesus and they have a relationship. And they say, Lord, he whom you love is ill. You can hear just from the way that they communicate what's happening. You can hear by the way they're framing it up, how much they're relying on Jesus' love for them to be the motivation for Jesus doing something. So look at how they communicate Lazarus. He whom you love. Now, John's gospel, most of the times John refers to himself as the apostle of Jesus. He refers to himself as the one that Jesus loved. And here we have Lazarus, you know, the one whom Jesus loves. And Mary and Martha are going, you can hear it almost in the statement that he's ill. And because you love Lazarus, Lord Jesus, you're going to do something about it. But when Jesus heard it, he said this illness doesn't lead to death. And you go, that's amazing. Fantastic. He's going to do something and he's going to come really fast. He's going to prevent it. Actually, that's not what Jesus does. It says it is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Okay, so whatever Jesus is going to do, this is super incredible when you see it, and it's very important. This is for the glory of God, right? And the Son of God is glorified through whatever it is that Jesus intends to do, right? In other words, the process, the end, what Jesus intends to do, it involves somewhat of a delay. And all of that, the whole process by which Lazarus will be raised back to life, it is all to glorify the Son of God. And through that, through the Son receiving glory, God is glorified, right? We see this in John 17, a shared glory between the Son and the Father. Okay, so I want you to take note of this. There is an illness, and I'm going to circle every time we see this illness, right? This is not the focus of the text. This illness is simply a platform for what? For the glory of God. But the way, I don't know why I snorted there, but the way that God receives glory through this and the Son is glorified through it is not just by sickness being healed and by death being prevented. There's a different set of circumstances that are about to take place. So here we have Mary and Martha. They have a preference, a desire. They have a petition to bring to Jesus. Please prevent death. Jesus is going to help them, not the way they initially imagined or wanted, though. Now, Jesus loved Martha. So guess what? It's clear that they were on the right track. When they go, look, Lazarus is the guy that you love. He's a brother, right? He's a friend. And John goes, Jesus did love Martha and Mary and Lazarus, right? So whatever you're about to see now is because of the fact Jesus loves these two sisters and their brother, he's going to do what he does. When he heard that Lazarus was ill, do you know what he does? He stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Now this is fascinating because Jesus doesn't heal the sickness. He doesn't go with the messengers. He doesn't rush and go, we got to stop this. He loves Mary, Martha, and Lazarus so much that he stays 2 days longer in the place where he was. He loves them so much, he doesn't do anything immediately about the situation. He loves them so much. he doesn't respond to their requests the way they initially imagined he would, the way they preferred him to, which was to prevent death. I want you to see the love of Jesus all over this passage. Then after this, he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." Now, for those of you that are familiar with the story, you know that Lazarus ends up dying. I think when Jesus gets there, he's been dead for 3 or 4 days. I don't remember. We'll see it when we get to the text. But the point here is Jesus allows Lazarus to die. Mary and Martha are disappointed and let down. Jesus doesn't answer their petition the way they wanted, how they wanted, or when they wanted, right? But he does do, in an ultimate sense, what they desired of him, which was to keep Lazarus alive, and he raises him from the dead. That's what Jesus does. So see the love of God here, the love of Christ doesn't always prevent tragedy or answer our cries the way we want. Here we see the love of Jesus from Martha and Mary and Lazarus. It comes in the form of allowing them to sit in disappointment and tragedy for a few days. Now, in the place where he was, after this, he said to the disciples, "Let's go to Judea," right? Before this, though, the Jews in that region wanted to kill Jesus. So, the disciples are like, "Why are we going back there?" The disciples said, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and you're going there again?" Jesus answered, "Aren't there 12 hours in the day?" And they go, "Yeah. What's your point?" "Well, if anyone walks in the day, he doesn't stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him." Now, in John's gospel, the light, anytime light is referred to, Jesus will say in John chapter 8, "I am the light of the world," right? And in John chapter 1, it says that Jesus is the light that comes into the darkness of humanity, and he brings the life of God to humanity. We are in darkness. Jesus is the light that we need. And so anytime you see the concept of this light, which I'm going to highlight, is synonymous with the day, Jesus is saying, look, in the daytime, there's 12 hours to work and do stuff. If anyone walks in the day, he doesn't stumble because he sees the light, Jesus being the light and the life that emanates from the Father, right? Of this world, Jesus is the light of the world, right? But if anyone walks in the night, and here we have contrasted with the light in the daytime, the nighttime, well, he stumbles. Do you know why? Because the light is not in him. So the light will often be interchangeably used or just a way to describe Jesus. He is the light of the world. Other times, the light refers to the life of God, which of course you would say it's Jesus, so it's interchangeable. But either way, sometimes when biblical authors and especially gospel authors refer to someone dying, it's them, going to sleep, right? Them kind of, the light has been turned off and they've entered into that state of darkness, going into the earth, going into the dust to the ground and going into death. So darkness and death are often interchangeably used, and light and life are interchangeably used, right? So the light is not in him. The person who stumbles in the nighttime, after saying these things, he said to them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep." And so here we have death referenced, the nighttime, not having the light in a person. And I think the person that Jesus is mainly talking about is Lazarus. The light of life has been turned off in him. It's no longer there. And so Jesus intends to breathe that life back into him and bring him back into the light of day where he can live and work and be alive with his sisters. But for now, it's as if Lazarus is in the nighttime. But Jesus is also speaking to the disciples' fear that he's going to die. Jesus has an appointed amount of time by the Father on the earth. And as long as the Father says it's daytime and you're going to be alive, nothing's going to stop that. No one can take the life of Christ until he's ready to give it up willingly. And so he says, I go to awaken him, right? To shine the light back into this man because he's asleep. He's in darkness, right? He needs to be awakened to the light of Jesus and the life that he has to give Lazarus. The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll recover." Like, if he's sleeping, why would you go wake him up? No one likes to be woken up from a nap. Now, Jesus had spoken of his death. Okay, so, the idea of Lazarus being asleep or in darkness, it's referring to him being dead. He's physically dead. He's gone. His life has left the body. But they thought that he meant taking rest in sleep. So I thought, why would you interrupt someone getting rest? He'll recover. Don't interrupt that, Jesus. It's weird. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. You guys aren't getting it. Lazarus died. And for your sake, I'm glad that I wasn't there. That's quite the statement. And this is where we start to bring in this concept of disappointment again. For your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there. Why would you say something like that, Jesus? He's essentially saying, Lazarus died, and I'm glad I wasn't there to prevent it for your sake. There's something about this moment, allowing Lazarus to die, that's going to play into, it's going to be turned into a benefit for the disciples. And then Jesus will tell Mary and Martha, that they will see the glory of God if they believe. And so we're going to see, just like he said earlier, this is for the glory of God. He really means it, but it doesn't look like it's something glorious until Jesus steps in. But not until Mary and Martha have sat in disappointment for a few days, in confusion and frustration, so that you may believe. So what particularly is Jesus, referring to when he says it's for your sake that I'm glad I wasn't there? Because whatever Jesus is about to do, it's going to affect the faith of the disciples. They are going to believe even more, or a different dimension about Jesus, because of the fact that Jesus allowed Lazarus to die. There's a deeper level of faith. There's a deeper level of trust. There's a deeper level of awe that's going to come upon the apostles and those who are around that would not have come if Jesus just healed Lazarus and prevented death. Healing sickness is not as grand as resurrecting someone from the dead, raising him to life. One of those is more impressive. But let us go to him. So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let's also go that we may die with him. And Thomas is still convinced Jesus is just walking straight into death and he's cool with it. And Thomas is like, well, let's do it. Whether he's talking about Lazarus or Jesus, doesn't really matter. Either way, he's saying, let's go die. I guess we're just leaving. Now, when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. This is the setting. This is the setting of pure confusion and frustration and disappointment. And Jesus, where were you? Why didn't you come? We asked you. You could have prevented this. Mary and Martha will both say, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. So they know what Jesus could have done, but they had to sit several days in that whirlwind of emotions and disappointment and tragedy until Jesus finally steps in. Why does Jesus purposely allow this to happen? It wasn't an accident. This was intentional. And he says again, the two reasons we see so far is the glory of God and the faith of those who will witness what's about to take place. Now, Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. So where Lazarus is so close to Jerusalem that the disciples are freaking out because the people who are trying to kill Jesus are in Jerusalem, just 2 miles away. Easily could come and kill him. And many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. Right? So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, now remember Martha, I believe in Luke's gospel, the story of Mary and Martha. Martha's serving and doing all the stuff, and Mary's just sitting at the feet of Jesus. Martha is the busybody. Martha's the one who gets all the stuff done and is anxious about all the responsibilities and chores and making everything look nice. Mary's the one who's like, I'll just sit with Jesus. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Classic Mary. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here. Now this is the disappointment that so many of us are going to experience. It's the if you had been here. It's the God, if you had stopped this, you could have. You could have stopped this tragedy. You could have kept them from dying. You could have made the sickness go away. You could have changed the financial situation. If you had been here. They know what Christ could have done. And you know what's incredibly frustrating for us as temporal, limited human beings that don't see all things perfectly like God? What's frustrating for us is when we know God could have, but he didn't. My brother would not have died. So they know why, or they know what Jesus could have done, but they're not sure why he didn't do it. That's the tension we feel when it comes to having expectations that are let down, and seeing ourselves not experienced what we wanted and preferred and God doesn't do it, he wouldn't have died. You could have prevented this. That's the tension, is knowing that you could have, but not knowing why you didn't intervene. And look what Martha says, but even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. So notice how faith is maintained. In the midst of confusion and frustration and disappointment, Martha maintains this faith that Jesus, anything you want, God the Father will give it to you. And Jesus, which means there's still hope. There's a glimmer of hope in Martha. She's not sure what could happen, but she knows something can. Something can take place. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha said, I know he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. So she's thinking of in the future, of course we're going to be united with Lazarus in the resurrection. And that's probably what you're talking about, Jesus. And that's how we try and comfort people who deal with loss. Well, in eternity and the kingdom of heaven this and in the future this. And Jesus goes, oh, hold on. I am the resurrection and the life. This is not about some future set of circumstances. This is currently who Jesus is right now, is what is supposed to comfort and encourage Martha in the midst of incredible disappointment. Seeing Jesus let her down from her perspective and not doing what he could have. And Jesus doesn't go, well, in the future you'll this, or Lazarus will, it's, I am the resurrection and the life now. That's a reality that's true in the midst of everything we find ourselves frustrated with and all the tragedy we go through and all the pain and heartache. It's that he is still the resurrection. He is still the life. It's not about what future he has for us, even though that's beautiful that we have a guaranteed future. It's more about what is presently true about our God, is that he is the same today, yesterday, and forevermore. He is right now who he will always be and who he's always been. He's the resurrection and life, meaning Martha says, God will give you anything you ask. And Jesus goes, that's true, but let me tell you something even more profound. The resurrection itself, life itself, I am. This is the statement, similar statement to John chapter 8 when he says, before Abraham was, I am. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. So you go, Jesus, you just said the person who believes in you would die, and then you said he'd never die. One's physical death, one is spiritual death. The second death being separation from God in eternity. If you believe, you will never experience that. That's beautiful. Even though you physically die and you leave this body, the life Jesus promises is the kind of life that allows you and I to never experience separation from God again. Do you believe this? And she said, yes, Lord, I do believe. I believe that you're the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. So in the midst of disappointment, what does Jesus say to console and comfort Martha? He tells her who he is, who he's always been, who he will always be. Not necessarily what he will do, but just who he is. And then on top of that, because of who he is, if you believe he is who he says he is, there are benefits in the future for you. There's a promised and guaranteed outcome for you and I. We will never die. Even though physically we might depart from this body, we will still live spiritually in the presence of God, grafted into, communion with the Father, because we believe. So we will never die. And Martha goes, I believe that. I really do. Now we have Mary, the super emotional one, coming. When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher's here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but he was still in the place where Martha had met him. And when the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, you know what they did? They followed her. They followed her. Bunch of creepers. Now they're concerned. Supposing she was going to the tomb to weep there. Right? Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying, Lord, now look at what she says, very similar to Martha. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. Mary and Martha both know what Jesus could have done, but he didn't. He could have prevented death, but he intentionally didn't. He purposely allowed Lazarus to experience death. Why? We know faith and God's glory are at the center of why he did what he did. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. This is where you see the real, sympathetic heart of Jesus and the emotional distraughtness, if that's a word, that Jesus as a human being, still God in the flesh, but as a human being really experiencing these emotions. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said, "Lord, come and see." And he wept. And the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" Remember what John said about Christ in the beginning of the story? He loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, right? Mary and Martha send messengers and go, "Hey, the one that you love, he's dying." You know, the assumption within them sending the messengers was that because you love Lazarus, you'll do what we want and you won't let us down. And it's quite the opposite. It's because he loves them, he does let them down so they can see something better. But some of them said, "Couldn't he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying?" Because prior to this, Jesus healed a blind man that from birth had never seen a thing. No one had ever seen that before. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man. Notice what Jesus says, "Take away the stone." Why? For someone to move that stone means that something is going to be done about the body of Lazarus. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor. He has been dead 4 days." The KJV says, "He stinketh." 4 days in the tomb, that'll be quite the stench. That kind of decomposing flesh would make someone so nauseated. So Martha, what's she concerned about? She's concerned about how nauseating the smell would be. She's not thinking Jesus intends to roll away the stone because he wants to raise Lazarus to life. If that was on Martha's radar, the smell wouldn't even be who cares? My brother's about to come back to life. Y'all can just deal with the stench for a few seconds. But Martha, that's not on her radar. She's still thinking future. Jesus is the resurrection. He'll be the one that raises us back to life eventually. Jesus is talking about now. Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" Remember how I said in the beginning, faith and the glory of God are at the center of this story. At the center of Jesus' reasoning and why he allows death, why he didn't stop it, why he allowed them to sit in disappointment, why he let them down. It's because greater faith will arise because of Jesus not doing what they wanted when they wanted. It's because God will receive more glory because Jesus waited and allowed the tragedy to take place. They don't see this though. And so this is why Lazarus had to die. Greater faith and greater glory. So they took away the stone and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." What did Martha say to Jesus? "I know that whatever you ask, God the Father will give you. And I knew that you always hear me, but I said this." Right? Why is Jesus praying out loud? Well, it's on account of the people standing around. So what? So they may believe you've sent me. More people will be convinced that he really is the Messiah, the anointed king, right? The one that God has sent to bring life and resurrection, and this is the one. And they'll believe that when they see what's about to take place. When he said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The man who had died, in case you are someone who has short-term memory and you forgot who Lazarus was, he came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, who? The people who are standing around, "Unbind this fella. Let him go." This is what Jesus says to death. At the resurrection, at the crucifixion, he breaks death and the power of death and the power of the one who has death. He breaks that power off of those who trust in him. He commands death Jesus commands death to let his people go. Just like God says to Pharaoh, let my people go. Here we have an image of that in Jesus telling the people to unbind him, because the cords of death don't have any power over Christ, and he commands death to let go of Lazarus, and then he tells people, unbind him. Again, there's a bunch of disappointment in this story, isn't there? Mary, Martha, Lazarus. Can you imagine Lazarus being sick? Martha and Mary go, don't worry, we sent for Jesus. And he's sitting there going, I know, I'm waiting. And then he dies. And all three of them are going, what the heck happened? God allows things and purposely doesn't stop things and even delays things for greater glory and greater faith, which is long-term for our benefit. So this is the one powerful truth that you need to understand, is that it's because of the fact that Jesus loved Martha and Mary and Lazarus that he didn't prevent death. He actually delayed his coming and allowed death to happen. This is what God often does. He doesn't always meet our preferences. He doesn't always do what we prefer. He doesn't always meet our expectations perfectly. And it's because he loves us, that he has greater things to show and do in us that we don't frankly always know to pray for and desire. So in the midst of disappointment, you can know God will be glorified. He has something better that you don't see. And the delay, the frustration, the confusion, the disappointment, it's all the part of God producing something better in our world, in you, and really for his glory and for the faith of others. This is the promise we can hold on to, is that God takes all things, just like Joseph, and he makes them all work together for our good. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and do that and hit the bell so you can be notified of any future videos that come out. And check out AboveReproachMinistry.com. We have completely free Bible study courses, a 40-day program, a 27-day, and 11-day program, all kinds of free resources. You can get a copy of my book. You can join our online church. You can get some merch. We have a bunch of stuff at AboveReproachMinistry.com. And it's also linked in the description below. Go check that out. And thanks for watching.